The Travels of Marco Polo, a sleepy summary. Tonight we are going to drift all the way across the world, the way a boy named Marco Polo once did, so very long ago, when the world was wide and unmapped and full of soft, glowing mysteries. It begins in Venice, a city that seems to float on the water like a sleeping swan, its canals dark and quiet under a violet evening sky, its bridges arching gently like closed eyelids. There lived a merchant family called Polo, and Marco's father, Niccolo, and his uncle Maffi had already gone once before, far away to the east, to the court of a great and distant emperor called Kublai Khan, who ruled over more land than anyone in Venice could imagine, so much land that a man could ride for a year and never reach its edges. And when they came home again, dusty and sunburned and full of stories, they found that young Marco had grown while they were away, quiet-eyed and curious, and soon enough, when Marco was only a boy of 17, they gathered him up and set off again together, back toward the rising sun, back toward the Khan, who had asked them to return and had given them a golden tablet, a paisa that would open every gate and every door along the way, like a key made of moonlight. So let yourself sink into the little boat that carries them first out of Venice, gliding past the lit windows and the murmuring water, past the Lido where the sea breathes slow, and even against the sand, out to the open water, and further, ever further, the shoreline of home sinking softly behind them like a lamp being turned down for the night. The Adriatic rocks them gently for many days, the sailors murmuring their old songs to the creak of rope and timber, and little by little the cool northern air gives way to something warmer, something spiced with dust and distance, until at last a shore rises up called Acre, on the coast of the Holy Land, where the air smells of dust and salt and old stone, and where merchants from 100 countries haggle in the shade of pale, sun-bleached buildings, their voices rising and falling like a tide of their own. Here Marco, still just a boy with wide, unblinking eyes, watches camels kneel in the dust to be loaded, watches robed traders spread bolts of cloth like flower petals across the ground, watches the light change color as the afternoon grows long and gold and slow. From Acre they travel a little further to touch, ever so gently, the holy places near Jerusalem, walking soft-footed through narrow, shadowed streets where every stone seems to hum with old prayers, and there they gather a small vial of oil from the lamp that burns at the holy sepulchre, a soft and sacred thing to carry all the long miles ahead, tucked safely away like a secret kept warm against the chest. They think of the great Khan far away, who had once asked Niccolo and Maffi to bring him back oil from that very lamp, believing it might carry some blessing across all those thousands of miles. And they carry it now, carefully, the way you might carry a sleeping bird in cupped hands. And here, too, they learn that the great Khan, far away, is not well, and so they wait a while in Acre, patient as falling snow, the days sliding by slow and warm and unhurried, until word comes at last that he has recovered, and only then do their heavy trunks and patient camels turn east once more, and the long, long road truly begins. They sail up along the coast to a little port called Ayers, in the land of Lesser Armenia, where the mountains rise green and sudden from the sea, and ships from Genoa and Venice creak at anchor in the harbour, their sails folded like tired wings, and merchants from as far as Baghdad come here too, because it is the nearest safe harbour for goods bound eastward. From Ayers the road climbs inland, and the travellers pass through Turkoman country, where you can drift past herds of sheep and long-necked horses grazing on rolling hills beneath a sky streaked pink at evening, and where the weavers make carpets so fine and so brightly coloured that they seem almost to glow even in the dim evening light, red and blue and gold, soft underfoot as fresh fallen leaves, each pattern passed quietly down from mother to daughter. A generation folding into generation like the carpets themselves, folded away for the night. Onward into Greater Armenia, where the great mountain of Ararat lifts its snowy shoulders into the clouds, so high that no one, they say, has ever climbed to its very top, its peak lost always in a soft crown of mist, and where an old, old story is told, in a hush, of an ark that once came to rest there when the whole world was drowned in water and had to begin again, clean and new, every creature stepping softly out two by two onto a mountainside gone suddenly quiet and green. Let your mind drift southward now, soft as a feather falling, down through the land of Georgia, where the mountains are wild and craggy, and the passes narrow and cold, where the local kings, they say, are marked from birth with the shape of an eagle somewhere upon their bodies, and where there is said to be, hidden away, a fountain that flows not with water but with oil, dark and slow and strange, welling up endlessly from the earth, enough to fill many lamps. Though it is not so pleasant to eat with bread as our own sweet oil would be, and travellers come from far off just to fill their small clay jars and carry a little of that strange, dark blessing home with them. Down further into Mosul, on the banks of a great river, a city of merchants and cloth sellers, where the fine, ridged fabric that we still call muslin gets its very name, woven soft and light as a whispered breath, and where Kurdish traders and Nestorian Christians and Arab merchants share the same shaded streets, each speaking their own tongue, all somehow understood. And a little beyond, the vast and ancient city of Baghdad, once the seat of the caliph, its markets a hush of silk and spice, its air thick with the smell of dates and dust and rosewater, its old library said once to have held more books than any place on earth, until you drift past it too, deeper into Persia, where the land unrolls in gold and rust-colored hills beneath a sky so blue and so wide it makes you sleepy just to imagine standing beneath it, watching your own small shadow stretch long and slow across the sand as the afternoon wears on. In Persia, the caravan passes through Tabriz, a bustling city of merchants where silk and pearls and turquoise pass from hand to hand, and voices murmur in a dozen languages under the awnings of the bazaar, blending together into a low, comforting hum, like a lullaby without words. Weavers there work threads of gold into cloth, so fine it seems to pour rather than fold, and jewelers sit cross-legged in tiny alcoves, turning stones over and over in the lamplight until they catch the flame and glow. Then further still, softly southward, through Save, where three wise kings are said to have once set out long ago, following a star, carrying gifts wrapped in cloth as soft as this blanket around you now, and where their tombs, it is said, still rest quiet and undisturbed. Through Kashan, known for its tiles the color of a summer sky, and for a great and famous iron mine nearby, and Yazd, ringed by pale desert, its narrow streets shaded by tall wind towers that catch even the faintest breath of air and pour it down cool into the rooms below, like a house breathing slowly in its sleep. And down into Kerman, where the mountain rock itself seems to hold hidden veins of turquoise, blue as a vein beneath skin, and where the finest steel needles in all the world are said to be forged, and where falcons are trained, patient and hooded, for the hunt, sitting so still on the wrist of their keepers that they might almost be carved from stone themselves. From Kerman, the road winds down through a narrow, stony pass, cold enough at its top for snow, even when the plains below shimmer with heat, and slides at last toward the sea, toward a hot and shimmering port called Hormuz, where the heat presses down like a heavy quilt, and the ships are stitched together with cord instead of nails, their planks sewn tight and corked with fish oil, bobbing gently on water the color of dark glass, loaded with spices and ivory and precious stones brought from India. From lands even further away, across the water. The travelers think for a moment of taking a ship there, sailing on across that warm and glittering sea straight toward Cathay, but the vessels seem too frail, too much like a leaf on a pond, unfit for such a long and heavy crossing. So instead they turn back, patient, unhurried, the way a sleepy tide turns back from the shore, and head north again, back up through the deserts, past a place where a bitter salt wind is said to blow so hot it can steal the breath from a traveler caught unsheltered at midday, into the dry, sun-baked plains of eastern Persia and toward Khorasan, that in this dozing telling of the tale drift together like clouds merging into one another, soft-edged and slow. Onward now, deeper into the heart of Asia, into the region called Badakhshan, tucked high among mountains where the air grows thin and cool and clean, and where, hidden in the rock, are the mines of the Balas ruby, glowing red as embers in a dying fire, dug out by torchlight and carried carefully down the mountain paths on the backs of patient men, and only by the king's own leave, so that no stone might slip quietly away and lessen the value of the rest. There is silver, too, hidden in those hills, and a blue stone the color of a twilight sky, which the whole world came, eventually, to call by the name of that very province. The horses here, they say, are said to descend from the legendary steed Bucephalus, swift and fine-boned, bred in green, hidden valleys where the grass grows lush between the peaks, and where, in the villages, they make cheese and drink the clear mountain water, and everyone sleeps early, wrapped in wool, beneath skies crowded with more stars than you could ever count, even if you tried all night without blinking. It is said, too, that the sick who climb up out of the lowland heat into those cool mountain airs grow well again within only a few days, as though the mountain itself breathed some slow, gentle medicine down over the valleys. From Badakhshan the path climbs even higher, up into the Pamir, which the old travellers called the roof of the world, a wide, cold, silent plateau so high above the sea that fires, they said, burned strangely there, pale and reluctant, and food took longer to cook than it should, and the world felt closer to the moon than to any village. Great wild sheep with huge curling horns wander those heights, so many that their horns are piled along the trail like driftwood, taller than a man, and no bird sings there, and no beast stirs, only wind. For 12 days, imagine 12 slow, hushed, snow-crunching days, the caravan crosses that lonely upland, seeing no house, no village, nothing but wide white silence and far-off peaks turning rose and violet as the sun goes down, until at last the land begins gently to slope downward again, and the wind stops howling quite so loud, and you can drift at last down into the desert kingdom of Kashgar, a green oasis ringed by orchards and vineyards, where the cotton grows soft in the fields, and gardens are watered by narrow channels, and merchants from every direction stop to rest and trade, as we are resting now, beneath the shade of mulberry trees. From Kashgar the road, soft as a whispered word, leads on to Yarkand, its rivers cold and swift from the mountain snows, and then to Cotton, oasis towns strung like beads along the edge of a vast and terrible desert, each one a little pocket of green and water and shade, with orchards of mulberry and fields of cotton, and rivers running down from the snowy mountains carrying, hidden in their gravel, smooth, pale stones of jade, which the people gather patiently from the cold, clear water, wading in at dusk with baskets and quiet, careful hands. Further along lie smaller oasis towns too, Pem and Charchan, each a brief green hush before the sand returns, their wells sweet or bitter depending on where the digger happened to strike water, and the travellers learn to fill their skins carefully and never to trust a well they have not tested first. And beyond them lies the desert itself, the great and terrible Gobi, which the old tale calls the desert of Lop, so vast that it is said to take a full month to cross even at its narrowest place, and so silent, so empty, that travellers whispered of strange voices calling their names among the dunes at night, of ghostly footsteps following just behind, of drums beating faintly far off where no drummer could possibly be, and of whole troops of phantom riders glimpsed at the edge of sight and gone again before a second look. So the caravans learned to tie little bells to the necks of their animals, a soft, constant chiming through the dark, so that no one might wander off alone into the whispering sand and be lost forever, swallowed by silence. And they learned, too, to plant a marker flag or a heap of stones at each stopping place, small anchors of certainty in all that shifting emptiness. Hush now. We are past the worst of the sand. On the far side of that desert lies the province the old book calls Tangut, and the town of Shaju, near the caves of 1,000 painted Buddhas, dug into soft yellow cliffs, each one glowing faintly with old gold and old blue in the lamplight, a whole mountain full of sleeping, painted gods, their painted eyes half closed as though they, too, were dreaming. Here the people burn the bones of their dead in slow, gentle ceremony, laying out food and drink for the spirit's long journey, and astrologers read the stars to choose the luckiest day for every small thing, for a wedding, for setting out on a journey, for even laying a baby down to sleep for the very first time in a new cradle. Further on, the caravan drifts through Ganju, a rich and busy town where the temples are heavy with silence and incense, their idols reclining, enormous and gilded, along whole walls, and where the sleepy travellers might have rested many days, watching camels graze on the coarse grass beyond the walls, while the great bronze temple bells rang slow and deep at dusk. Slowly, slowly, we are approaching the heart of it all now. Past Ningxia, its irrigated fields green against the dry hills, past Karakoram out on the northern grasslands, where the old Mongol capital once stood among rolling, windswept plains, the birthplace of the whole Mongol nation, quiet now beneath the wide sky, past Tenduk, where they whispered, the descendants of a legendary priest-king called Prester John still lived and ruled, tending their flocks beneath enormous skies, weaving fine camel cloth in their tents while their herds drifted, unhurried, across the grass. And then, at last, rising up out of the summer grasslands like something from a dream, the wonderful pleasure palace of Shangdu, which some call Xanadu, built by the great Khan himself, a marble palace gilded and painted, standing inside a great walled park 16 miles around, full of tame deer and singing birds and clear, quiet streams, where fountains whispered day and night, and where, at the very center, the Khan had built a movable palace of bamboo, gilded and lacquered, and hung with silken cords that could be taken apart and carried away on the backs of elephants whenever he wished to move his court, like a tent as grand as any castle, raised and lowered as easily as a curtain drawn for the night. Here at Shangdu, Marco and his father and uncle finally kneel before the great Khan himself, Kublai Khan, ruler of more lands than any man before or since, seated upon a dais among furs and silk, and he receives them kindly, remembering old Niccolo and Maffei well, and he is charmed, most of all, by young Marco, still barely more than a boy, clever and watchful and quick to learn the customs, and even the languages of this enormous, unfamiliar empire. And so the Khan keeps him close and sends him, over the years that follow, out across the vast provinces of Cathay as a trusted env, so that Marco sees more of that empire than almost anyone else alive, more than the Khan's own ministers, more than any traveller before him, and it is through his sleepy, wondering eyes that we now drift onward, deeper into the very heart of the East. Let yourself be carried down to Khanbalik, the city of the Khan, which one day will be called Beijing, a city so vast, and so carefully planned that its walls run straight as a plumb line in every direction. Its streets wide enough for 9 horsemen to ride abreast, so straight that from one gate a person might see clear through to the gate on the opposite side. Its palace roofed in red and green and gold, with great halls so large that 6,000 people might feast together beneath one roof. Warmed by fires and entertained by musicians and jugglers and lions, led in on silken leashes, tame as sleepy cats, and acrobats who tumbled and spun beneath the painted beams. Around the palace, walls within walls enclose gardens and orchards, and a small artificial hill, planted thick with evergreen trees carried whole from distant mountains, so that the Khan might always look upon green, even in the depths of winter. Here the Khan keeps a treasury deeper than imagining, chests of gold and silver and pearls stacked higher than a man. And here, too, he has ordered strange paper made from the soft inner bark of the mulberry tree, stamped with his own red seal, and declared that this paper, and no metal, shall be money throughout his lands, so that a man might carry a fortune folded small enough to fit inside his sleeve, and any merchant who refuses to accept it, it is said, forfeits his life. A rule spoken of only in a low and careful voice. Twice each year, at his birthday and at the New Year, the Khan holds festivals so grand that the whole city seems to glow, when he dresses in cloth of gold and receives gifts of horses and jewels and white camels from every corner of his empire, and 20,000 richly dressed barons kneel together before him in perfect, rustling silence. And beyond the walls, on wide hunting grounds, the Khan rides out each winter with an army of falconers and huntsmen and great striped hunting cats carried on cushions in little carts, and thousands of tents rise overnight across the plain like a second, temporary city, warm with braziers and thick carpets, so that even out beneath the open sky, the great Khan need never once feel cold. From the great capital, imagine Marco riding outward again and again on the Khan's business, down wide roads shaded by rows of trees planted especially, so that travellers should never lose their way even in snow, their branches meeting overhead like a long green tunnel stretching toward the horizon past staging posts, spaced a day's ride apart, each one stocked with fresh horses, 400 of them at the busiest posts, so that messengers could gallop clear across the empire faster than anyone in Europe would believe, changing mounts as easily as you might turn over in your sleep, a little bell jingling ahead of them, so the next post could have a fresh horse saddled and waiting before the rider even arrived. He tells us, too, of runners who could cover the ground on foot even faster still, stationed every few miles, wearing a wide belt hung with bells, passing a small packet hand to hand through the night, so that news which might take weeks by ordinary travel could reach the Khan in a single day and night, like a whispered secret passed swiftly down a long, quiet hallway. He tells us of the province of Karajan in the far southwest, of the great lake there ringed by mountains, and of Yunnan, where crocodiles bask in slow, muddy rivers, their jaws wide and patient, and where gold dust is traded by weight against silver, and of the wild, hot borderlands of Mien and Bangala, close by Burma, where elephants are trained for both work and war, patient grey giants swaying beneath the trees, and where in one famous and terrible battle a whole army of elephants, so Marco tells it, was startled at last by the mere smell and sound of enemy horses, and turned and crashed away in fright through their own ranks. He tells of Kenjanfu, a walled city rich with silk and fine gardens, its old palace grounds still fragrant with rose and jasmine, and of Chengdu, split by three great rivers crossed by bridges lined with little shops selling silk and tea and carved wooden trinkets, merchants calling softly to passers-by beneath striped awnings, and further still, drifting always southeast, of the province of Manzi, the old southern kingdom of Song that the Khan's armies had folded, not so very long before. Into his enormous empire, a rich, green, watered land of rice paddies and mulberry groves, and 100 cities each one, Marco insists, wealthier than the last. And here, hush now, softest of all, the tale comes to the city of Kinsai, which we now call Hangzhou, and which Marco swears, again and again, is the finest and most noble city in the whole world, a city built along a beautiful lake and threaded through with countless canals, crossed by more than 10,000 bridges arched high enough for boats to glide beneath without lowering their masts, a city so vast that it holds within its walls 100 marketplaces, each one thronged 3 days out of every week with sellers of silk and spice and fish and fruit, sellers of every soft and shining thing you could ever want, stalls of ginger and cinnamon, stalls of fresh melon and pear, stalls of songbirds in little wicker cages, singing sleepily in the afternoon warmth. The lake itself is dotted with pleasure boats, painted and cushioned, long and low and steady on the water, where families drift in the cool of the evening, sipping tea and watching the lanterns come alight one by one along the water, like slow, drowsy fireflies gathering for the night, while musicians pluck softly at stringed instruments from the stern. The people of Kinsai, Marco tells us, are gentle and peaceable, fond of their comforts, fond of bathing in cool water, fond of walking beside the lake in silk robes as the sun goes down. And every street, he says, is paved so cleanly that a person might walk from end to end of the city without ever soiling a silken shoe. There are public bathhouses warmed year-round, where a person might soak away the dust of a long day, and there are 10 great market squares, each one so broad that 40,000 people might pass through it in a single busy morning, weighing rice and silk and rare woods and jade upon careful brass scales. Physicians and astrologers keep small shops along the quieter streets, and teachers of reading and writing, and fortune-tellers who read the future in a scattering of little sticks. And every evening, as the light softens, watchmen walk the bridges striking the hours gently on wooden clappers, so that even sleep in that city comes wrapped in a soft and orderly rhythm. It is, in Marco's own soft words, a city so lovely that one might believe oneself to be in paradise. And he tells us this again and again, as though he can hardly believe, even now, that he was ever lucky enough to see it with his own drowsy eyes. From there the road, drowsy and slow, leads down to the province of Fujian, past hillsides terraced green with tea, and to the great port city that Marco calls Zaytun, and that we now call Quanju, where the harbour is so wide and so busy that ships from India and Arabia crowd together at anchor like resting geese, their sails furled for the night, unloading pepper and precious stones and fine cloth in quantities greater, Marco says, than all the ships of Alexandria together could carry. Warehouses along the docks are stacked to their rafters with sacks of pepper, so many, Marco tells us, that for every one shipload that reaches the whole of Christendom, 100 shiploads pass through this one harbour alone, and porcelain is made nearby too, delicate bowls fired pale and smooth, and sold for almost nothing, so common there and so precious everywhere else. It is here, at the very edge of the enormous empire, at the rim of the great warm sea, that our story turns at last toward home. Because the years have grown many, gentle listener, and the great Khan himself has grown old, and Marco and his father and his uncle have begun, quietly, to fear what might happen to them. 3 foreigners so far from Venice, so far from anyone who remembers them, if the old Khan should die and a new ruler come who does not know their names. And so, when a Persian embassy arrives at last asking for a bride, a young princess named Kokachin, to be escorted safely across the sea to marry the Khan of Persia, the Polos beg to go along as her guides and protectors, for they know the sea route, and the Khan, sad but understanding, at last agrees to let them go. A great fleet is made ready for them, 14 tall ships with 4 masts each, some of them large enough to carry 250 sailors and passengers, and stocked deep in their holds with rice and water for a voyage that no one, not even the most seasoned captain, could promise would be short. So the story sails now, drowsy as a becalmed ship, down along the coast, past the kingdom of Champa, warm and green, where elephants roam among the palms, and the king, they say, once kept 326 children, and where fine, dark, fragrant wood called alosewood grows deep in the forest, and then further, out into open water, toward the wide green island of Java, greatest of islands, rich with pepper and nutmeg and cloves. Its harbours crowded with traders from every shore of that warm sea, though the fleet does not linger there, only hears its riches described in passing, like a dream half-remembered, whispered by sailors leaning on the rail at dusk. Onward, softer still, past smaller islands where strange and wonderful things are told of birds bigger than any bird should be, and of little kingdoms ruled by queens as often as kings, and further on to the island Marco calls Lesser Java, which we call Sumatra, divided among 8 little kingdoms, its forests dripping with monsoon rain, its people gathering camphor and rare woods, and a strange, sweet sap prized in every distant market. And where the fleet must wait out the unfriendly season, 5 long months camped ashore in a stockade of their own building, a whole little wooden town raised for safety against the forest all around, patient as sleepers waiting for morning, while around them the strange, thick jungle rustles and drips and glows faintly at night with tiny insect lights, and unfamiliar bird calls drift through the dark like half-remembered lullabies. Further west, the ships pass small islands, the Nicobars and the Andamans, where Marco is told, in hushed and wondering tones, that men live who go about with no clothing at all, and that no bird nor beast in the world quite resembles what dwells there. And though the poor sleepy chronicler cannot always tell truth from a merchant's tall tale, he tells us anyway, wide-eyed, because that is what it means to travel so very far from home, gathering every strange story like a shell picked up along an unfamiliar shore, and then out into the wide blue emptiness, day after gentle rocking day, the sailors reading the stars each night to hold their course, until at last the coast of Ceylon rises softly out of the mist, a small, round, beautiful island, smaller than it once was, the old sailors say, worn slowly away by the patient sea. But they say, too, it is the very finest island in the world for its size, glowing with rubies and sapphires and topazes and amethysts, so fine that one, the greatest ruby Marco ever saw, as long as a man's palm, thick as a man's arm, blazed like a burning coal in the local king's hand, and could not be bought, its owner said, for all the treasure of a city. And upon a high, mist-wrapped mountain on that island, pilgrims of several faiths climbed together, patient and barefoot, to visit a footprint pressed into the very rock, said by some to belong to the first man, and by others to a great and holy teacher, each faith telling the story a little differently, as sleepy stories so often are. From Ceylon, the fleet turns north and west along the coast of India, that Marco calls the noblest and richest country in the world, and drifts past the shrine of St. Thomas, small and plain and quiet, where pilgrims of every faith come to kneel in soft reverence and gather a little of the red earth said to hold healing power, past the pearl fisheries of the Coromandel coast, where divers slip down again and again into warm water to bring up oysters heavy with soft, round pearls, holding their breath so long and so calmly that it seems almost as though they were only dozing beneath the waves, past the Malabar coast, where pepper vines climb every trellis and ships load spice until their hulls sit low and heavy in the water, riding the swell like drowsy whales. He tells, drowsily, of kings who go about nearly unclothed, but hung with jewels enough to buy a kingdom, of holy men who eat almost nothing and sleep on the bare ground, content and calm, untroubled by hunger or cold, of oxen used gently in place of horses, small and white and gentle-eyed, of a strange and hushed respect, everywhere, for every small living thing, so that not even an insect is carelessly harmed, and of merchants who judge the honesty of a stranger not by his coin, but by the steadiness of his gaze and the quiet evenness of his word. Onward the fleet sails, past the small, sun-baked kingdoms of the western coast, past islands where the story grows softer and stranger still, and at last, after 2 long years upon the water, into the warm harbour of Hormuz once more, where they had passed so long before, going the other way, still young, still just beginning. Here the Princess Cocachin, grown fond of these 3 patient Venetians who had guided and guarded her so far, is handed at last into Persian care, for the old Khan of Persia had died while they sailed, and she is married instead, gently, to his young son. And here, too, the Polos hear at last that the old great Khan, far away in Cathay, has died as well, and a soft sadness settles over the telling, the way evening settles slowly over a quiet room. But home is closer now, and so we drift on up through Persia once more, this time by a gentler road, and to Trebizond upon the shore of the Black Sea, its harbour glinting under a low autumn sun, and then by ship again, across water grown familiar now, salt-scented and easy, to Constantinople, city of domes and golden light. And at last, oh, at last, soft as the very last page of a very long story, home to Venice. They say that when the 3 travellers came at last to their own front door, after 24 years away, their clothes rough and strange, their speech a little tangled with foreign words and half-forgotten Venetian, their own relatives did not know them, and the servants nearly turned them away as beggars from some distant land, weathered and sun-browned, and worn thin by the road. And so, gently, patiently, they held a great feast, and invited all their kin, and appeared in worn travelling clothes at first, quiet and smiling while their cousins whispered doubtfully behind their hands, until, before the astonished eyes of the whole gathering, they took knives to the seams and linings of those rough old coats, and out spilled rubies and sapphires and emeralds and pearls, a soft, glittering river of jewels tumbling onto the table and catching the candlelight. More wealth than anyone in the room had ever seen gathered in one place, proof at last, gentle and undeniable, that every word of their long and wandering tale had been true, and the whole hall fell hushed and wide-eyed, the way a room falls quiet at the very best part of a bedtime story. And that sleepy traveller is very nearly the whole of it, though there is one more soft thing to tell before you finally drift away. Some years later, Venice went to war with the city of Genoa, as those 2 great trading cities so often did, quarrelling over harbours and routes the way 2 sleepy cats might quarrel over the warmest corner of a hearth. And Marco, though older now and settled, went out with the fleet as a gentleman commander, and was captured in a battle at sea, and spent a quiet season in a Genoese prison, not unkindly kept, for prisoners of good family were often treated gently there, allowed visitors, allowed books, allowed long, idle afternoons with little to do but talk. And it was there, in that dim, unhurried cell, that he told his story aloud, night after night, to a fellow prisoner, a writer of romances named Rustichello of Pisa, who listened, wide-eyed as any child at bedtime, and wrote it all down exactly as Marco spoke it, city by city, desert by desert, palace by palace, mountain by mountain, until the whole enormous, glittering journey lived again upon the page. Word of the strange and marvelous tale spread even before Marco was released, copied by hand and passed quietly from reader to reader, so that the whole enormous, glittering journey would never be forgotten, and could be carried, gently like this, across all the centuries since, into rooms just like this one, into ears just as sleepy as yours, so that even now, so very far away and so very long after, you can still close your eyes and feel, just faintly, the sway of a camel's back beneath you, the hush of desert sand, the glow of painted caves, the shimmer of a lake at Kinsai, the wide, wide sky over the roof of the world, carrying you gently, gently all the way down into sleep. Rest now. The long road is behind you. The camels have been unloaded, the ships tied up at their quiet docks, the lanterns of Kinsai have gone dark one by one, and the desert bells have stopped their soft chiming at last. The candle is nearly out. Venice is waiting quietly at the end of every dream, its canals dark and still, its windows glowing low and warm, its bridges holding their breath in the dark, and you need go no further tonight than the soft, safe shore of your own pillow. Somewhere far off, a bell rings once, gently, the way a temple bell might ring at dusk in Ganju, or a mule's bell might jingle in the hush of the Lop Desert, and then all is quiet. Sleep now, sleep.